Okay, so up to this point, we've been implementing a lot of the features that are required for the first assignment. Notice that we've been using the default look and feel. So let's clean up a couple of things using the CSS library that I'm suggesting. Although you're free to use maybe other libraries that you might be familiar with. If you're not familiar with any particular library, please use the Bootstrap library that I'm suggesting. Also, a couple of things that I've taken a couple of shortcuts that I'd like to fix. For instance, it's usually considered a bad practice that the controller itself is making the HTTP request directly to the server. Typically, we want to encapsulate that in a client service that it's only dedicated to talk to a database, right? To the server. So let's clean up a couple of things here, right? So that we apply some best practices. So first, let's style this a little bit so it looks a little more presentable, right? So I'm suggesting to you that you should use a library such as the Bootstrap library. That is very popular amongst developers. Well, there's a couple few of these libraries that are specifically for developers like us. They don't style the entire page. They have lots of widgets that you can add to your page, and they have a lot of code snippets that you can use for either for messaging or for creating carousels or cards, where you can create a card with an image and then some text down below. To style forms or lists, and so I encourage you to come in and peruse through their documentation. We're going to be using them throughout the semester. So as we need some of these, I'll be introducing them and using them as we go. Certainly, forms is very useful. That allows you to make them all responsive, so that they look good either in small formats or on desktop applications. So let's use Bootstrap to style our pages. Okay. All right. So first of all, we're going to be using the CDN version of the Bootstrap. I'm not going to download Bootstrap, although you're welcome to download it and host it on your server. I'm going to be using the CDN. So Bootstrap CDN. I'll grab the latest version. There it is. So I'll copy that. And let's style first some of the forms that we worked on earlier this week. Let's see if we go to the login page. Let's style this real quick, right? So that we can make this a little more presentable. So let's go into the login template, and in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to load the CSS style sheet, right, using the link element. And here we can point to the location of the style sheet. This could be local or it could be hosted remotely. There we go. And we need to also tell it what is it, right? Because link, you can link to a whole bunch of things, right? So here you need to tell what is it. How should I interpret this document? So well, this is a style sheet. All right. So if we load the login page, notice that it already looks a little prettier, right? It changes the font a bit. It just makes it a little more presentable. Notice that the default here is for this to be flush to the content. Please fix that so that it's not flush to the content. So all content should not be flush with its parent content, right? You should have some, at least 5 pixels that make it look a little better, right? So let's do that. So and that's what Bootstrap gives you. It gives you a whole bunch of really nice shortcuts, class names that allows you to very quickly style your content. So here I am putting all my content inside of a parent div, right? So that I can put around it a container class that will add this white space all around my content. So here I'm going to apply a class CSS class called container. So if I do container, notice that what container does is that it adds, kind of centers the content in the middle, right, and it adds margins to either side, right. I think this is a little bit too much for me, but it did add white space around it. Also notice that it has some thresholds, right, so that as it gets smaller, right, your whole content gets smaller, right. And it has these thresholds that it detects when the browser changes size, up until it reaches the minimum size, and then it doesn't grow smaller any further. Yes. The other alternative is to use the container fluid. Container fluid doesn't add the margins all the way around. I'm sorry, the side does not center the content, but it does add white borders all around. Okay, so I prefer this look and feel. You're welcome to use one or the other. Okay, the other one, the container, just a container, is more geared toward desktop applications where you center the content. This one is more like ambivalent, whether it's on desktop or on mobile. Right, it just adds a nice border all around. So I'm going to go with just a container fluid. Okay. All right. What else? The other couple of things that we could do here to make this presentable is that these forms. Right, we can add here a class that makes them a little more presentable. So here's the form control. A form control. Notice that what it does is that it expands the entire width of the page, and it makes it. Notice that it wrapped. See that? It takes the entire width of the page. So it now looks nice and flush with its label, right? Still label works, right? So if you click on the label, it still takes the focus, and now it also adds some nice rounding around this. Okay, so let's apply this class to all the input fields. So let's add it to here as well. The password. Let's see. There we go. All right. All right, excellent. So this already looks prettier. How about the login button? So the login button also can be styled, and there's all sorts of types of buttons that, and you can certainly take a look at the documentation for buttons. If you go to buttons, there's several standard coloring schemes, right? Where red is danger, green is success, primary is blue. So these are all standard colors that allows you to look consistent across your application. So let's do that. We can apply a class here on the button. We can say that this is BTN. If we refresh our application, notice that the BTN is, wait, you can't see? Oh, right, has no styling. So BTN, there's a BTN, we can say BTN primary. So primary is the color blue, right? That's the default color. And sign up, we can leave it as a link. One thing that I don't like here is that it's not adding any notice that there's no spacing between the bottom of the input field and the beginning of the label. See that? Notice that there's more space between the label and its input field than the spacing between the label and the end of the input field. See that? So I would fix that a little bit. So we could style this perhaps only for this template. So we could have maybe a template that a styling only for this login page. So we might call it maybe login style .client.css. So this might be a style that only applies to this one single page. One thing that we might do is that we might say that I want to style all the inputs so that they have a margin at the bottom. All right, so we might say margin bottom maybe 10 pixels. Right, and so on the login template, we can load this. We can say link href and load our brand new style. It's still a style sheet, so style sheet. Right, so that if we refresh, notice that it adds a little bit down below. Right. Also notice the login also is no longer flush with the input field. Okay. So please, as part of the assignment, make sure that you make good use of white space all right? That things are not flush, that things that have a consistent spacing, that things are nice and aligned with one another, right? And that it in general looks pretty, right? That looks presentable. Yes.
For just naming conventions, let's say you wanted to do this kind of styling across all of your pages.
Yep.
What would you name it? Like instead of login, would you say like general style?
Yeah. So typically, we would like to add the naming convention that based on your organization, right? You apply or you use an acronym or token that is acceptable to the entire organization. So, for instance, this input is my styling, right? Perhaps I don't want to apply to all the inputs. Yes, I want to apply only to inputs that follow a particular class, right? So, for instance, we can say that input dot, right? That says meaning I don't want all the inputs. I want to have all the inputs that have the following class, WebDev, for instance. Okay. So this says that this is not being applied to all the inputs, but to those that have this particular class. So if I go back to login, only the input fields that have the following class that is applied to it. So WebDev, right? Now this might be enough that says it's the inputs that have this class. If it has a specific meaning, right? That this might be maybe those input fields that are in the login page, for instance, right? You might then combine multiple classes, right? But I think this is enough. Right? It's an input that has this specific class, right? So now notice that when we reapply this, notice that it doesn't apply now to all of them. See that? It only applied to the first one, but not the second one. See that the first one has a spacing, but not the second one, because the second one does not have that class applied to it. See that? All right. To apply to the second one, I would need to also apply the class to this other input field over here. And that's being applied to that one as well.
Right, but like let's say you wanted to use that same
Styling across?
register.
Yes, right. Yep.
Style sheet itself, or the style.
Right. So here, so in this login style client.css, I would only put styles that are very specific to this one, right? If we want something that goes across, I would have a separate one, call them maybe styles across, right? And in here, I would put things that are widely across all of them, right? So for instance, this is a good example where perhaps I want all of them to have this styling, right? And then in my login, I would load all of them. I would load first Bootstrap, because that's my overall look and feel, right? Then I would load the ones that are organization wide, so my styles, and in here I can override any styles that that Bootstrap had declared. Bootstrap added the round corners. Maybe I don't like the round corners, right? So in my styles here, I might remove the round corners because I don't want round corners anywhere. Okay, but then over here is the one that's specific to this template. So this one overrides both of them, right? It can override Bootstrap and it can override the one that is organization wide, right? So you would load them in that order. Make sense? Okay. It might be that you don't have anything specific about this particular page, right? But nevertheless, it's good to have all three available. Okay, excellent. All right, so I think we touched on the login. If we want to apply the same thing with the register, we can quickly do that as well. If we go to the register templates, we can load a lot of these same style sheets in the register. So let's load it at the top. There we go. Typically, they would go on the head, right, of the element of the document. I do not have a login or a register, so I'm just going to load these two, and I'm going to apply to the input field the classes, the class form control, and WebDev. There we go. So let's copy that and let's put it all our input fields. And presumably this would be class button success. Success is green, like the color of money. There we go. Right. So plus we'll have do a container fluid around to make it look prettier. Make sense? All right. So let's take a look at the maybe perhaps styling the admin user admin over here. Let's see. Let's style this table that looks awful. Let's open up that register. So here's the user admin client. So let's load those two style sheets that we just loaded earlier, right? These two, and let's load it up here. There we go. So if we load our user admin, it already looks a little prettier. Let's add the container fluid all around. So this will be a div, and this will be class. This will be container fluid. Okay, and let's see, what else? Okay, there we go. We got something better. Also, the table can be easily styled by applying the table class. The table class. That looks a little prettier, I guess, somewhat. Wait, is it just table? Yeah, it is table. All right, by default, I know why, because at border 1. Let me remove that. Okay, so that looks a little better. You can also add a couple other things to the table. If you look at the table here, where's the table? Tables. Okay, there we go. For instance, you can stripe them. You can make them dark. Let's see. You can highlight a particular row. Where's stripe? Oh, there was this stripe right there. You can add striped here, so that when you render them, it will alternate the colors of each one of the rows if this is very, very long. You can make them responsive, right? So for instance, notice that this table is quite large, right? And if I want to scroll, I have to scroll all the way to the right. Oops, sorry. But notice that my normal contents, like the user admin, should not scroll, right? It should stay put, right? Only the table should scroll, right? So there's styling to do that as well. Responsive tables, where you can make them scrollable. See that? You can make it scrollable, and to do that, you need to wrap the whole table in a div, right? So for instance, this whole table, I can wrap it inside of a div, and then at the bottom, at the end of the table, I can close that div, and now this becomes responsive. Notice that now only the table scrolls as opposed to the entire content. Right? This is especially important in a smaller format like a phone, right, where you want to display a table. And if you scroll the whole thing, right, the whole page would scroll, right? So you don't want that to happen. Only the content that you want to scroll only scrolls. Make sense? Everybody good? All right. I think you can play around more with CSS. We'll be using the Bootstrap styling library all throughout the semester. We'll introduce new concepts as we need them. Okay.